Well, we'll let folks in as they come, and I think we'll go ahead and get started here. So, thanks so much, everybody. Welcome to Grant Writing Tips and Tricks for Edible Education. It's a pleasure to have you, and so glad to have this chance to explore some skills, some strategies, some tips around grant writing. This workshop is a collaboration between Whole Kids and Edible Schoolyard Project. So pleased and grateful for my colleague Ashley Ellis from Whole Kids to be here today, and so looking forward to the conversation. And yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit of background context about both of our orgs. I'll share about Edible Schoolyard, and Ashley will share about Whole Kids. Regarding Edible Schoolyard, some of y'all may come and have been part of our workshops in the past and so may be familiar. And if this is your first time, welcome. So glad to have you. Edible Schoolyard is a 30 plus year old organization, and we were founded in the mid 90s by chef and activist Alice Waters, who you may know as the founder and proprietor of the restaurant Chez Panisse in Berkeley as well. And our as a program, as an organization, we have our flagship garden and kitchen classroom at a public middle school in Berkeley, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School, serving a diverse community of 1,000 middle school students, their families, the faculty and staff at the school. Um, and in recent years, we added an additional program site in the city of Stockton, California, and that is a urban farm site. And so we feel very excited and grateful for the chance to be practicing edible education in both of these two different types of contexts, one a school site and one an urban farm. And in addition to our direct programming, we have network and training events such as this one, serving folks like yourselves and seeking to support the broader movement of edible education, educational gardening and cooking classrooms. And we very much are so grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with you all to provide resources and support with interconnection and networking, and just to grow our relationship and the movement in general as a whole. So we're so excited to dive in today. So grateful for you to be here. Um, and so grateful again to Ashley for coming and presenting today around this topic. And so this obviously funding is core and is so essential to creating sustained programming and sustained change in our communities. And so, yeah, so just on a quick logistical side of things, before I pass it to Ashley, you'll probably see and notice that we are recording this workshop. And that is so that we can have this recording as a generally available resource long term for both yourselves to follow up and see and review anything you want to dive a little deeper on after the fact here, but also for the general public and the wider audience of folks in this field. To that effect, if there was definitely going to be time for Q&A, particularly at the end. And so if you would not like to be recorded in the final edited version of this, please feel free to pop in the chat your question, and we'll do our best to respond to that. If you don't mind being recorded, and that's always great too, because the Q&A leads to such dynamic and rich conversation as well, then thank you so much for being willing to be featured in the recording afterwards. I think it'll be a really great source of support for folks who view the workshop afterwards. So yeah, so just wanted to be sure to note that so that we're respectful of folks' privacy and choices around that. So, um, all right, well, that's all I have in terms of like grounding from ESY side, Edible Schoolyard side. And so I'm so excited to um, introduce and pass the mic to Ashley Ellis. Thanks so much, Ashley.
Awesome. Thanks, Russell. I'm so excited to be here today, too. And thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this topic. Russell, if you want to hit the next slide, I thought that you guys seeing our faces in the recording just wasn't enough. I don't know why. I thought you need to see pictures of our faces. Anyway, so I'm Ashley. I am the Edible Education Program lead for Whole Kids. You might have previously heard of Whole Kids Foundation. We are now called Whole Kids, a project of Whole Foods Market Foundation. And but we have the same mission and the same work. So if you've heard of us, we're still doing the same work. We Our mission is to enhance children's wellness by improving access to nutritious foods, supporting healthy food education, and building professional development to sustain those changes. A little bit about me. I was a garden educator myself about 10 years ago in San Jose, California. Applied for and executed many grants in that role. Now I'm on the other side. I'm with Whole Kids, which is a funder. And so I'd love to share some tips and tricks that I find useful and that I have the perspective of having been on both sides. And I also, like Russell said, I would love to hear from you guys, both with questions and any tips or tricks that you guys have. We will have time both in a breakout session as well as for hopefully we'll have questions at the end. And so I'd love to hear from you guys as well. Cool, next slide. So agenda for today, we just talked about us. So we are now going to talk about you guys and who you are. We'll do a quick poll. Then I will ground us in some information about garden grant funding in the United States. And just a note on that, I know that not everyone here is necessarily just focused on gardens, and that's okay. Edible education, of course, is a broader space than just gardens. I do think the tips and tricks here are really broadly applicable. But some of the data that I will show you guys is from garden grant funding specifically. So after that, we'll move on to the the grant writing tips more broadly. We'll do a quick breakout session, and then I will go over some resources. And then at the very end, I'll touch on the Whole Kids Garden Grant, which is open now, if that is relevant to folks, so that you can apply. And then at the very end, hopefully we'll have time for questions. All right, let's hit the next slide. So about you, of course, we got a little bit of info in the registration pages, which thank you all so much for registering and providing info there. And your questions really helped me develop the content for this presentation as well. So hopefully you're here because you work in the edible education space, or maybe you volunteer in this space and you are seeking funding for your program or your project or something you're supporting. And then who are you guys? We see everyone from school gardens, cooking programs, after school programs, nonprofit orgs, and then, but like who specifically within that? Teachers, students, organization staff, admin, parents, community members. And this is non-exhaustive list. Of course, there's so many wonderful folks joining us today. We actually would love to take a moment to do a quick poll. So Russell, if you want to set that up, that would be awesome. And there you can just tell us specifically what your role is and any familiarity that you have with grant writing. So we'll take about 30 seconds to do this poll and see how folks answer. Awesome. Russell, can you remind me the scale for familiarity with grant writing? 1 to 10 is 1 not familiar, and then
Yeah,
10 is very familiar?
exactly. Yeah.
Right, cool. Awesome. So we have such a range. This is great. Love it. We'll give it another couple seconds for folks to fill this out. This is so cool. We're all over the map. I love it. Okay, awesome. Yeah, cool. So we've got a good range. We've got garden educators, kitchen educators, we've got teachers, school admin, parents, volunteers, program coordinators, program directors, and then familiarity all over the map. Love it. And I mean, hopefully this will be geared toward the whole range of you and the whole range of in the spectrum of familiarity with grant writing. So we've got some we'll ground in some basics and some really high level stuff to get you oriented, but we'll also be able to provide some kind of next level tips. So hopefully we can meet you where you're at and definitely ask questions in the chat along the way or at the end if we don't hit anything specific to your question. Okay, cool. Let's hit the next slide. So awesome. So yeah, I wanted to kind of ground in some data about garden grant funding specifically in the United States. That's more where my personal experience comes from is in the garden grant space. And there's some really cool research that I'm going to show you that I pulled from to show you guys. And so generally, though, very high level, when we're just talking about grant funders, who are grant funders? Well, typically there's two main types. There's often public entities, so that's like state government, federal government, local government entities giving out grants. So that's one type, and then private entities would be another main type. So that would be foundations like Whole Kids, Whole Foods Market Foundation, corporations doing philanthropy, nonprofit organizations, etc. So that's it's not, and this is not exhaustive, of course, but this is kind of just the general like sense of like who grant funders are. A very high level note that is perhaps obvious to many people, but if it's not, definitely worth noting that every grant funder has different goals and different priorities. So anytime you're looking for grant funding or looking at a different grant, you definitely want to make sure to understand what the priorities as well as the criteria are for that individual grant and that funder, because those are going to be different. So really the what, when, where, and how, it all depends. So cool. So let's hit the next slide. Awesome. So, or wait, do we get the next slide? There we go. Cool. So yeah, there's some really great research that was done in 2023 about 2022, and it just shows all of the edible education funding in the United States. This was mostly garden grant related funding. This is not exhaustive, but this research surveyed 31 organizations that give out grant funding across the US for garden grants. And I think it's really encouraging. There's 14, then this is in 2022. Of course, it's even more since then, and we are hoping to redo this work. Whole Kids participated in it, and it was run by Kids Gardening. So we will hopefully do this again and get more updated numbers. But from 2022, there was over $14 million in funding for garden grants. That was over 3,000 grants that were awarded, going to and or serving over 70 million kids. So hopefully this is encouraging. There is funding out there, and funders want to get their funding out to people doing amazing work. Um, awesome. Let's hit the next slide. So who is getting grant funding? This chart just kind of gives you a breakdown of in that research that was done of who received the funding. So I don't know if it's hopefully it's not too small a font, but I'll just read it out for you. The main category or the biggest category here is schools. Right behind that's nonprofits, and then following that preschools. So that's a type of school, of course, and then school districts, childcare centers, and then libraries, YMCA's, and other types of organizations. So that's just to give you a sense of like who is getting this funding. Then on the next slide, I'll show you sources of funding. So I talked about high level, like who are grant funders. This shows you for the edible education space in 2022, who was this funding coming from? 35% comes from foundations. I think that's 29% coming from corporations. And then beyond that, you've got federal and state, you've got individuals, and then some other like local programs and things like that. So by and large, it's corporations, foundations, and then right behind that really is federal and then individuals. Those are kind of the biggest pieces of the pie in terms of where funding is coming from. Next slide. Cool. Okay, so now that we've grounded in some data just to understand like who are these grant funders, who's giving money, who's it going to, I want to now start with some really high level tips. And again, this will be, this will be new to some of you, and this will be hopefully a good repeat or refresher for some of you. First things first, eligibility. I love to think about this first because you don't want to waste your time on a grant application if you're not eligible. So might seem obvious, but always be sure to understand and check eligibility requirements before going down a rabbit hole of seeking grant funding. Second, get really clear on what you are seeking. This can evolve as you begin to apply. That's normal, and that's life. But I do really recommend having a good sense of not only what is the mission of your organization or your project or whatever entity, but also the goals that are driving this. Time and time again, like what I see is that the best applications are strongly mission driven and strongly goals oriented or goals driven. So like I said, like this can evolve. That's life. It happens, but definitely like having a good strong sense of that will be really helpful for you as you go through a grant application. Next, map out your plan for using the funds and gather materials to apply. Super basic, but a really important step. Think through your plan for actually using the funds, not just the budget, but like the steps. What are all the steps and how will you actually execute? That process, not only is it probably required for the grant application, it will help you think through what's realistic for your situation, your resources, the amount of people that are working on whatever project you're working on. Starting to just really like plot that out will really help you think through and think, oh, you know what? Like I had this grand plan to survey 1,000 kids, and now I'm realizing it's just me, and maybe that's going to be really hard. Maybe I need to engage volunteers and adjust the plan or something. And then as you're drafting, I put a couple points here that are definitely important to whole kids as a funder. And this won't necessarily be true across the board, but I do see this as commonly kind of important things to highlight across the edible education space in terms of grant applications. And those are highlighting your community connections. So, how are you engaging in the community? Highlighting student engagement. So, whether, and that can mean many different things in different contexts, but how are you engaging the population that you're serving? Literally, like what are the ways that you are delivering, whether it's content or lessons or activities, whatever it is. And then a third thing would be sustainability, or another word for that would be longevity of the plan or the program project that you are proposing. So I highlighted these, and we'll kind of get into a lot more about these, but I highlighted these because these are really three high level things that I think are going to be important for most edible education funders. These are things that you'll often see as important that you would definitely want to highlight in your application. Second to last, have a friend read it over if you can, ideally an external person so that you can get fresh eyes. And that just helps you. And this is really not about like typos, grammar. Of course, if you find those, that helps. But really, like from whole kids perspective, we're not looking for typos or grammar. Like we're overlooking that purposefully. And we just want to understand what you need, what work you're doing and what your needs are. So when I ask or when I put, have someone read it over, that's to help you have someone with fresh eyes say, I actually didn't really get what you meant in this paragraph or in this response. Like, it's not really clear to me, or like here you were kind of repeating yourself. It can be really, really helpful because sometimes we're just like in the weeds with jamming out a grant application and you don't realize like, oh, this makes sense to me, but maybe this doesn't make sense to someone else. This is truly so important because, and I'll talk a little bit more about this and some of the specific tips, but think about like grant reviewers and how little time they might have, how many grant applications they might be reviewing, and how important it is to have clear and concise answers so that you're getting across the pertinent information to fight for this grant funding. Okay, last but not least, is there an opportunity in rejection? Now, I want to be careful not to, toxic positivity spin this because getting rejected for grant funding, it stinks. It does. It's, you've put so much time and effort into this and proven why you should get these funds. And so getting a rejection is not great. That's just the way it is. However, if you can think about what opportunities you might see in that rejection, especially if you get feedback. For example, in Whole Kids Garden Grants, we give every applicant feedback on how they might improve their application for next time, whether or not they're awarded. That's definitely not the case of all grant applications, but regardless, it can be really helpful to think through like, what can I improve on? For example, something that I really think is like almost universally true is that if you spend time to like build your community support or build local partnerships, not only will that help carry you through and make you more sustainable, but that can also help you make your work or your organization more even stronger when you do your next grant application. So think about ways that you can use this as an opportunity if that does happen. Okay, next slide. One of the awesome questions that we got in the registration form, was someone wanted to know about best practices for team collaboration when working on a grant, which I love. Not everyone will have this. Like some folks are going to be solo working on a grant. But for the folks who do work in a team, I just wanted to give again some high level tips for that. And really, like, this is not reinventing any wheel here. This is kind of like basic project management, but hopefully it's helpful to get anyone who is working in a team on a grant application to get you thinking about some of the things that are important as you go through this together. First, so important, form a core team of diverse stakeholders with specific roles. So if you think about filling out a grant application, if you have a team of 3 people, but if everyone kind of has the same exact perspective of you, that might not be as strong as if you got a stakeholder, like one person from inside the org, maybe one person who's a volunteer could help out, or a teacher or a student. Like, are there ways that you can bring in diverse perspectives, diverse stakeholders, so that you can make your application even stronger? Those other stakeholders can help you think about things you haven't even thought of yet, that can make your application even stronger. I definitely recommend breaking any proposal or application into specific sections and then delegating roles and assigning sections. That can help with like workflow in terms of like multiple people working on something together. I also definitely recommend setting deadlines. Of course, you would have whatever deadline is set by the grant itself, like the application deadline. But I also recommend setting internal deadlines. Like, we want to have all of our materials together by this date so that we can then get a first draft by this date. We want to have the executive director or the teacher review it by this date. Setting internal deadlines can be really helpful. And then that way you can set kind of a work backwards plan to plot out exactly what you need to do by when so that you can get your grant application in on time. And then last thing, it's just super practical. Like, I definitely recommend using either document version control so that you're not having conflicted copies of a grant application document. That can be so frustrating when multiple people are putting in like really good work, but then you're like, oh no, like they did it on this document, but then I was over here editing this document. So there's so many ways to do this, and platforms that do it for you, like shared, collaboration platforms. But just make sure you're thinking about that. Maybe you use track changes so that you can see like who added what where, and you can see how things evolve over time. All right, next slide. All right, so telling your story. When you're thinking about crafting your narrative and writing the grant application, these 7 tips I think are so helpful for framing how to write your grant application. So I'll go through each one of these. So if you want to hit the next slide. Awesome. So be specific. So it may seem obvious to answer the question that's being asked. I'm not trying to be, whatever, glib here. I mean, it really is practical or helpful to think like, especially if you feel that you might be like repeating yourself in question to question or answer to answer. If you're like, gosh, I feel like I'm really like saying the same thing over and over again. I really encourage you to go and look at each question individually and answer each specific question one at a time, because as grant funders, I this is of course not universally true, but I definitely have tried to make like our grant applications not redundant in questions. We try to make each question unique so that you're not having to repeat yourself. So if you feel like you are, take a moment to say like, what are they actually asking here, and how do I answer that question here without giving them like, well, you asked this question, but I'm going to give you this, and this, and this, because I want to tell you everything. There's a time and a place for for all of it, right? So make sure you're answering the question that's asked in each question, or in each section. And then pick a specific project to focus on if that makes sense for the grant application. This won't always make sense, maybe if you're like applying for your whole organization, but um, basically specifics are going to be like the best thing that you can do. The best thing you can use in your grant application is specifics, specific examples, specific numbers, metrics if you have them, impact metrics, whatever it is. Anything like that where you can be specific is really going to be to your advantage as you fill out a grant application. Um, Definitely use this as an opportunity to express the unique challenges that are faced by your particular school or community or whatever population you're serving. That's so key in a grant application. Um, Applications are so much stronger when the reviewer understands the specific needs of your community and how you want to address those needs through this grant. So definitely make sure that you are being specific there and spelling out what that looks like for your community. On that note, details are always better than platitudes. And I am guilty of this. Like, I use platitudes all the time. Like, for example, this grant will enable us to teach students where food comes from. Awesome, right? That's not bad. Platitudes can be really helpful. However, I do urge you to, it doesn't mean never use them in a grant application, but I do really encourage you to be so specific where you can. And if you do use a platitude like that, or phrase, whatever you want to call it, make sure that you are being specific about like, why do you care about teaching kids where food comes from? How are you going to teach kids where food comes from? I guess why, I already, that kind of hits at that. Yeah, just like really get at the who, what, when, where, and why. That will really, asking the 5 W's will really help you make your grant application more specific. So an example of a more specific way to say that you are excited about teaching kids where food comes from. I guess this is a little bit of a different example, but we're going to use $200 to buy worms, a bin, clipboard, this, that, the other. It's for this specific population, fifth grade science class. It's for this project. They're doing a science experiment on vermicomposting. It's for this earth science unit, nutrient cycling. Like, this one sentence, 3 lines, has given me so much information if I'm a reviewer about what, how, why. No, I guess not where, but you don't have to necessarily hit all 5 W's in every sentence, but providing specifics where you can, so important. One last note on need. Earlier, when I was talking about use this as an opportunity to talk about the specific need of your community, I want to encourage folks to think about need more broadly than just economics. And this might be specific to each grant funder, might think differently about this, but I definitely want to encourage broad thinking on this because need can look so different in so many different communities. I mean, it can look as different as, each community looks. And so, for example, like when you're thinking about need, of course, do think about like financial disparities, but also think about like health disparities, think about access to resources, think about even like if you're in a school context, like administration barriers or district barriers. Think about impact from natural disasters. There's so many ways that you can think through need. Next slide. Okay, be unique. So this one does not mean like reinvent the wheel. It does not mean like you have to have the most innovative grant application that's ever been seen. That's not what this means. What this means is that you really want to just make sure like that your grant application is a shining example of like why you deserve this grant funding, and that is going to be unique to your context and your situation. And then just specifically, like if you're submitting multiple applications to one funder, whether that's like you got a grant previously and now you're applying for a renewal, or whether you are a fiscal sponsor and you're applying for a grant for 10 different sites, whatever the case may be, it's not that you can never use copy and paste. Like, work smarter, not harder. You definitely can copy and paste things where it does make sense, but also really make sure that you are not just copying and pasting everything. You want to make each application stand out and make sure that it reflects the unique context of that site. Or if it's a renewal grant, what I love to see is like make sure you're reflecting how are you successful with the previous funding, but also like how are you building on that success? Where are you going now? Has your approach changed at all? Have you gotten feedback that you've incorporated that's made your program stronger? And then specifically, one more thing I really like to see when I look at renewal grant applications is um, sustainability, and we'll talk more about that later, but really just proving that that the grants you've applied for from one funder are not the only funding that your program has ever sought out or counted on. We really want to see financial sustainability, and because funders want to grant funds to entities that will last beyond the cycle of the grant funding. Next slide. Be concise, and in honor of conciseness, I kept it short on the slide. So keep it short and sweet. Always clarity over complexity. Do not write a book, you guys. As much as I'm sure your book would be incredible and I would love to read it, the grant application is not the place to write a book. So keeping it short and sweet is always the way to go. But at the same time, like, don't be afraid to share specifics, right? So it's a balance. Um, this might be different for different funders or applications, but I highly encourage folks to use bullet points. You don't have, I don't need you to think through like narrative complexity or syntax. Like, we're not in English class. Bullet points are fine. I just want to know what you're doing and why you want the grant funding. So, and then yes, it's about painting a picture, but not giving too many extraneous details. So that's where editing really comes in, your own eyes, and then ideally having another set of eyes editing and saying like, oh, you know what, like this whole detail you provided, like it's a cool story, but it actually has nothing to do with the grant funding you're asking for. So just thinking through like what is extraneous. Okay, next slide. Be realistic. So what this one is about is making sure that your application reflects the specific context of your space, of your community, of your population, whatever it is. Because we've seen it be, I've seen it be like, it's really, people use a lot of vague language that like platitudes. And then I'm like, but like, what are you actually doing? And what's your community? And how does this actually work there? Um, or sometimes this can mean like that, I guess that would be a case of not being specific enough, but not being realistic enough might be like, you have these incredibly lofty goals, but then once you start talking about your resources or your capacity, it's like, oh wow, I don't know how they could possibly do all this with the limited resources they have. Like, have they thought through the reality of actually doing this and carrying this out in their space? So more and bigger is not always better. You definitely want to be right sized. You want to think about the capacity that you have, the resources, et cetera. And then similarly, like every project has challenges, right? That's life. So don't be afraid to talk about challenges that you have in your grant application, but we also want to see that you've thought through how will you overcome them. You don't have to have it all figured out, like nobody does, but it is nice to see like, okay, these people are talking about like, oh, we have this specific challenge in this community or with this student population, and here's ways that I've thought about addressing that. That tells me you have put so much thought into this plan, and that to me, that's like a green flag as a reviewer. Someone asked in their registration form about creating realistic evaluation plans, which is such an awesome question. Could do a whole webinar on that. But just one quick note on that today. I would say that really key there is rooting in the sense of what makes sense for your program, or sorry, rooting in what makes sense for your program. So there's kind of like two schools of thought. Like some folks will reverse engineer, like start with metrics and then reverse engineer, like how do we get to those metrics or goals. And then some folks, will just look at like, what is the work we're doing? And then how can we measure that and prove that that is good work? There's different schools of thought, and I'm not here to tell you which one is right or wrong, but I definitely would say that like if you are just getting started or, if you don't know where to start, root in the work that you're doing and, start with like core metrics, start with just measuring what it is you're actually doing. Definitely include both quantitative and qualitative, meaning like numbers as well as qualitative things like stories, quotes, photos, things like that. Those are all amazing. There's so many ways to measure impact. It's not just numbers. And then short term, long term, medium term, and just staying grounded in your program's reality. Those are the tips that I would say to get started there. Next slide. couple examples. So I kind of already touched on this, but so one example is last summer we had a hard time getting volunteers, but we're hopeful that it's going to be better this year. Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad you're hopeful, but that leaves me wanting to know what makes you hopeful. Do you have a plan and that's why you're hopeful, or are you just like, I'm hopeful, but I actually haven't thought about what, like how we're actually going to achieve this. So the second example, we learned a lot last summer. We had issues with volunteers we recruited at the end of the season. What we did is we developed this task force of a couple people. They helped us understand like where we should really target our outreach and how we're going to use social media in this community, and we're going to do a newsletter in this community. We're going to recruit volunteers from here. Oh my gosh, incredible. So if I read through this example, I would say, first of all, I hope that this person who wrote this is actually has the capacity to do all of this. But reading this through, I'm thinking, wow, they really have thought through a very thorough plan for how they're going to overcome challenges that they have found in their program. Next slide. Be strategic. So this one's really about like know your audience. And in this case, I mean like who's the funder, and what are their priorities and their goals, so that you can strategically frame your grant application and your needs and your work toward that. However, big caveat, and I actually learned this one from Ashley Rouse at Edible Schoolyard Project. Um, it's really not advisable to stretch yourself too far or go in so many different directions, chasing after grant funding. That can be a really unsustainable and unfulfilling practice for nonprofits or whoever. Because if you find yourself running in a bunch of different directions chasing funding, it can just really be such a drain on an organization. If you want to hit next, Russell, there's a graphic that I think really paints the picture. I just Googled this and I loved it. But you run the risk of turning into an amorphous blob if you're seeking out like, if you're going after this, but it's really not what you set out to do, but it's going to give you like this money here, but then this money here. So this is really a balancing act. Like definitely be strategic. And if you think that like the mission or the goals of your work align with the funding, the funders' priorities and goals, do it up and like make sure that you are making that case and frame it that way. But if you take a hard look at it and you think like, gosh, I really think this would stretch us in a different direction, like that sometimes is the valid answer to say like, yeah, I just don't think this is right for my organization. Next slide. Be sustainable. So grantors do not seek to be your one source of funding. We look for assurance that our investment's not going, to waste, to put it bluntly, I guess. So it's definitely a good idea to seek out other sources of funding, both like sources, but also types of funding, and to think through just like different ways that you can support your organization or your project over time and make it sustainable. Don't be afraid to talk about it. And I know this kind of feels maybe counterintuitive because you're like, well, why would I want to tell you in a grant application that I got funding from this other group? Well, I would say it's all about how you frame it, because if you talk about it and then you're like, so we're actually like all set and we're doing great, I would be like, oh, okay, then why did you apply for this? Why do you need this funding? But if you say like, here's how and I'm going to give an example, but like, here's funding that we got from here, but I'm applying to this grant because we really want to develop out X. If you make the case for why the funding you're applying for is worth, why you need it, then you having other funding will make you look stronger and more sustainable. Next slide. So the example here, and I use these like greater than, I didn't want to say like one's bad or good, but like I'm trying to get at like a spectrum of like how you can make this stronger, right? So the first example being, this is the only grant we applied for. We also have the support of our PTA though, versus we've received materials from Home Depot. We did apply for a Home Depot grant. We didn't get that one. We are going to reapply for that one this year, and we're applying to this other grant, but we're ramping up our events as well because that's another way for us to just like spread awareness in our community. And maybe there's like some fundraising involved in the events. Awesome. I read this and I think, wow, like, and I would also want to see like specifically, probably in a different section, how they could use the funds that they're applying for from us. But this really shows me like they are not totally reliant only on this funding. And that's really something that I think a lot of funders look to see. Next slide. Be passionate. This is the easiest one, right? You guys are all here because you are passionate and you do incredible work in your communities. So hopefully this is the easiest one. And if you are applying for grants and funding that's in line with your mission, then the funder will care about what you care about. So that should all be like green lights there. And then I kind of touched on this earlier, but I would always say that like for me, and I think for a lot of funders, like authenticity and brevity, or like being concise, keeping it short and sweet, those things are always going to be stronger than anything like fancy words or extraneous details. So um, definitely like show us your passion, but make sure that in your editing, you think to edit toward authenticity and brevity. Someone asked how to adequately highlight work they do at the intersection of environmental justice, food justice, and education. What an amazing question. $1 million question, really. Like, we could do a whole webinar on that, but I would just say, like, what would be important to me if I was a reviewer or a funder, I would look to see you describe how those concepts show up in your community, those three concepts, and how they are interrelated in your community, and then how your work addresses those multiple areas simultaneously, and how you're uniquely positioned to do that work. And if you have things like multidimensional metrics, like metrics that would show impact in all three areas or be cross-functional kind of metrics, incredible, maybe not, but essentially I would want to see you speak to the question, how is your organization or entity addressing those issues together? How is that more effective than if you were to address them separately? So hopefully that's a helpful tip there. Okay, next slide. And we are at 4:44. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a breakout session of 10 minutes. When we come back from this, I'm going to show you guys a couple of resources and hopefully have a minute or two for questions. But this breakout session, what it is it's basically focused around what I'm calling the pitch. In every grant application, you will need to give something like a pitch. Sometimes it's called like a statement of need. Sometimes it's called a case statement. There would be different character counts, different requirements, of course. So this is very just like general, but this is just a brainstorming exercise to kind of get your juices going, get you thinking about what you could do for this. So I'm going to give you two options for how to engage. The first option is in this 10-minute session, take the first 5 minutes to draft a pitch. I recommend like 1 to 5 sentences. You only got 5 minutes, so you're not writing a book here, but and you can use these examples on the slides if that's helpful for you, if you want inspiration. So that would be the first 5 minutes. And then the second 5 minutes, you will, that first 5 minutes is like maybe on mute, just silently. And then the second 5 minutes, you'll be in a small group, and I encourage you to read your pitches out loud to each other. Feel free to provide any feedback if you want. I love the compliment sandwich style of feedback personally. So that's option one for how to engage is do a pitch and share it with the group. Option two, if this like terrifies you, or if you're like, I'm not ready for this. This is too soon. Or if you get deer in the headlights, with writing exercises, I totally get it. If you want to just look at the examples on the slide for folks who that fits for you, take a look at these examples and just kind of read through them and think about everything we just learned, and apply that to kind of think through like what are the strengths and weaknesses of each of these two examples. So that would be like what you would do kind of quietly for the first 5 minutes, and then second 5 minutes, come off mute in your small groups and chat with the group. You're going to be in a mixed group, so chat either about other folks' pitches or chat about these on the slide. Cool. Ask any questions in the chat if you have them. Otherwise, Russell, if you want to go ahead and put us in the rooms for 10 minutes.
Sounds great. Okay, yeah. So I'll open up the rooms now, and it should send everyone pretty much automatically to a room. We'll support as needed. And so thanks so much. We'll see you all soon.
Awesome. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully we have everyone back. Russell, does it look like I think so. Yeah, I'm seeing everyone. Cool. This is great. Awesome. Well, I wish we had more time, you guys. I'm like, whoa, where did the time go? I'm going to super quickly, Russell, if you want to hit next slide actually twice. I'm just going to share a couple resources really quickly. And then I do want to respect everyone's time. So of course, feel free to log off if you have to go, but I am happy to stay 5 or 10 minutes over and answer any questions since we went a little bit over time. So really quickly, resources. So many great resources out there, you guys. The whole kids website, chock full of resources. We have a whole document on grant writing tips that inspired this presentation. Success stories, go for inspiration. The edible schoolyard resources site. Oh my gosh, you guys! If you haven't been there, you need to check it out. It's incredible, especially mostly related to this topic, like their program development resources. Incredible, so much good stuff there. And then the last two links, surveys, the one that we talked about earlier in the presentation, and then kids gardening, they have a whole 3-part webinar series just on grant funding. So if you liked this, but you want more, that would be a great next step to go seek out those. The next slide is just a list, and it'll be clickable if you get the slides after this of some garden grants in the US that are available at different times and different like high level info about them. And then the next slide, I'll just tell you a little bit about Whole Kids in our last minute here. So I've mentioned the garden grant a couple times, but Whole Kids supports schools through more than just our garden grants. We also have our Bee grant, which is a wonderful complement to the garden grant. And then we also support school food through school cafeterias. We support cafeterias moving towards more scratch cooking. We support education and capacity building around that, and as well as like salad bars in schools, and really so many cool programs that we don't even have time to talk about. But check it out if any of those interest you. And then on the next slide, I'll just give you a super quick overview of the garden grant, because it is open now. So if this does apply to you, the Whole Kids has a garden grant that is open through March 5th, next Wednesday, for applications. It is a $3,500 garden grant to new or existing gardens. You tell us the plan. We're really not prescriptive about what you use it for. You can use the funds on nearly anything related to school gardens. More details on our website, of course, and no deadline by which the funds must be spent. And we just ask for a progress report. Next slide. Who do we support is schools across the US and Canada, serving at least 10 students. Again, any type of edible garden. So hydroponic, aquaponic, in bed, sorry, I was trying to say in ground, raised bed. I had a whole song, you guys. And anyway, but any type of garden that you can think of, if you're growing edible food, we love to support it. We do prioritize awarding applicants encountering barriers to accessing healthy food and nutrition education. We usually receive around 1,000 applications from schools every year. This year, we're funding 750, which is more than ever, and the grant size increased as well. So we're really stoked about that. So definitely apply if that makes sense for you. And then if you want to hit next slide, this one really, I've kind of covered it already, because what we're looking for, it's kind of like, hitting at the tips that we already went over. Like, we want to see a thorough plan. We want to see sustainability. We definitely want to see administrative buy-in, because in schools, like, that's absolutely necessary to have a successful school garden. We want to see youth involved in the garden, of course, engaged in or integrated throughout the academics and different classes. We want to see that connection to healthy eating, because that's our mission and our priority as a funder. Yeah, cool. Okay, so that was super quick. Hopefully I wasn't talking way too fast, but Russell, if you want to hit next again, it'll just be the slide with our websites on it for folks to grab as they trickle out. But if anyone does want to stick around with questions, because I'm sorry, I wish we had more time, but we can stay 5 or 10 minutes over and answer any questions that you have. So I'm going to look at the chat. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, and I just realized I didn't respond to Maria had a question. Oh yeah, this was such a good question, Maria, about AI. Or did I respond? I don't think I did. So I'll address that one verbally. So yeah, Maria was asking about how AI has affected grant applications, if you're able to tell when orgs or individuals use it. Such a good question. I really need to do more research around this. So thanks for bringing this up for me. And yeah, I really don't have a good answer for you. Like, I can just say personally as a reviewer, like, I haven't noticed that yet. or like if it's happening, it's going over my head, like if folks are using AI. I mean, I guess I would say like, oh yeah, if this feels like it's not written by a person, maybe, but honestly, like Chat GPT, like I'm sure you guys have all seen it. It can be really hard to tell. So I really don't have a good answer for you around that one, but I love the question. Um, Carolyn, if we are a current recipient of the Whole Kids Garden Grant as a nonprofit, would we still be eligible to reapply for a second round of funding? So, Carolyn, the big update this year is that we are now applying, or I mean, sorry, awarding um, grants to gardens on school sites only. So nonprofits can still be community partners, they can still be the fiscal sponsor. But if your garden is on a school site, then yes, it's eligible. If your garden is on the site of your nonprofit or somewhere else, unfortunately, that's no longer eligible for the Whole Kids Garden Grant. And if you have more specific questions, feel free to email me or email on our website. There's an email form that you can reach out to. Awesome. Is the Whole Kids Grant only for school? Okay, cool. So Amy's question, I think I just hit that one as well. Awesome. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so I think we hit all the questions. Awesome. Well, thank you guys all so much for joining. I really hope that this was valuable for you. And please do like use all the resources available to you on the Edible Schoolyard website, on the Whole Kids website. We both have like places where you can email the staff there. So reach out if you have specific questions to your situation that we didn't answer. And yeah, also check out just all the other webinars that Edible Schoolyard project offers on their website. The virtual trainings are awesome. Thanks, everyone.